Larkspur Harbor remembered the morning Elias Rook made a public disaster of himself in front of a woman who had almost nothing to her name. Not because he shouted, not because she cried, not because anyone got hurt, because she laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, bright, clean, completely unafraid, right there beside the chandlery alley, where fog clung to the barrels and gulls argued over fish bones. Elias Rook owned the largest boatyard on the North Pier, 3 warehouses, 2 timber sheds, and enough influence to make cautious men lower their voices when he entered a room. He was 43, broad-shouldered, disciplined, and famously difficult to soften. The woman laughing at him owned a canvas satchel, a thin brown coat, and 1 pair of gloves with the fingertips worn through. That was all. And yet, by the end of the year, Elias Rook would understand something Larkspur Harbor did not. She had not arrived with nothing. She had arrived with the one thing he had spent 20 years losing. A self no one had managed to purchase. He had come into town that morning for copper nails, lamp oil, and a length of tarred line. Elias was a man who believed in lists because lists did not ask questions. Lists did not disappoint you. Lists did not step into your life cold, hungry, and watching you as if they could see the shape of the locked room inside your chest. He walked down Harbor Street before the shops had fully opened. The bakery was breathing yeast and smoke into the cold air. A fish cart creaked toward the market. Old Ivor Bell, who was not related to anyone named Bell despite claiming every bell in 3 counties, was sweeping salt grit off his stoop. Then Elias saw her. She sat on an overturned crate beside the chandlery alley, knees tucked close, back straight despite the cold. Her satchel rested beside her like a small, loyal animal. She was not asleep. She was studying the harbor with the calm focus of someone who had learned to measure danger without looking frightened of it. Elias was practiced at not interfering. That skill had carried him through betrayals, funerals, business disputes, and every town supper where someone tried to speak to him about feelings in a tone he considered intrusive. He could pass by almost anything. But she looked up. Their eyes met. And for reasons he would fail to explain for months afterward, Elias stopped. Most people looked away first when Elias Rook stared too long. This woman did not. She only lifted her chin a fraction, as if to say she had been cold before, and would not be impressed by it now. "You waiting for the packet boat?" he asked. "No." "Do you have people here?" "No." Her voice was even, not sharp, not pleading, just finished. He looked at her coat, too thin for November by the water. He looked at her hands, folded to keep them from shaking. He looked at the satchel. Whatever it held, it did not hold a future. Something uncomfortable moved under his ribs. He opened his mouth before he had built a sentence sturdy enough to survive. "Could I buy you—" The silence stretched just long enough for him to hear how it sounded. Her eyes widened. Then she laughed. Not a small laugh, not a polite one. A real laugh, surprised and helpless, the kind that breaks out of a person before pride can catch it. She covered her mouth with the back of her worn glove, but the sound had already struck him square in the chest. Elias stood there with the harbor fog behind him and the worst half-sentence of his life hanging between them. "A breakfast," he said. Too late. Too flat. Entirely useless. She lowered her hand. Her eyes were tired, but now there was light in them. "I suspected that was where you meant to land," she said. He did not know whether she was being kind. He took her to Nora Bell Crane's eating room, a narrow place near the pier where the windows sweated in winter and every bowl arrived too hot to touch. She chose fish chowder and black tea. Elias ordered coffee he barely drank. Her name was Nora Bell. She gave it without apology, ornament, or invitation for pity. Nora Bell. Like a fact written on a clean slate. She ate carefully, which told him more than hunger would have. A starving person who still protects dignity is not merely hungry. She broke the bread in small pieces. She kept her eyes mostly on the bowl. When Maribel brought more butter without being asked, Nora thanked her in a voice that made the room gentler for a moment. Elias watched all of it and said almost nothing. Usually his silence closed doors. With Nora, his silence felt like standing at one. "Are you passing through?" he asked at last. "I haven't decided." "How does a person not decide where she is going?" Nora looked up. "By first deciding where she will not return." That should have warned him there was a story behind her. A large one. A hard one. Elias did not ask for it. He knew too well what it was to have people reach for the tender part of a history as if it belonged to them. So he stayed quiet, and she seemed to understand the difference between disinterest and restraint. When the bill came, Elias reached for it. Nora reached into her satchel. He frowned. "No." She placed 2 coins beside his hand. "Half." "You don't need to." "I know." The words were mild. The meaning was not. He looked at the coins, then at her face. She was not buying food. She was buying the right not to owe him herself. Elias let the coins remain. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. Harbor Street was louder now. Men rolled barrels toward the pier. A boy ran past carrying twine. A bell rang from a boat entering the channel. "There is a boarding house above Finch Lane," Elias said. "Mrs. Hallow keeps it clean. She bargains hard, but she is fair." Nora studied him, weighing the advice for hooks. "Thank you," she said. Then she walked away with the satchel over one shoulder, back straight, head level, as if the whole town were watching, and she had decided to give it nothing it could use against her. Elias stood outside Maribel's until she turned the corner. He bought the copper nails. He bought the lamp oil. He forgot the tarred line. He did not realize that until he was halfway back to the boatyard, and by then it seemed too honest to turn around. 3 days later, Elias returned to Harbor Street for the tarred line. At least, that was the reason he gave himself. The line was necessary. Boats needed rigging. Warehouses needed repairs. A practical man could always locate a practical reason to walk past Finch Lane at 9:30 in the morning. He found Nora outside Mrs. Hallow's boarding house, sleeves rolled, helping 2 hired girls beat rugs over the back rail. Her cheeks were pink from work. Her hair had come loose at the temples. She looked less like a person stranded by the tide and more like someone quietly negotiating terms with the world. Mrs. Hallow stood in the doorway with her arms crossed. "She works like a person who knows the value of a bed," Mrs. Hallow announced to nobody in particular. Nora saw Elias and gave him a small nod. Not gratitude, not invitation. Recognition. Somehow, that was worse. He bought the tarred line and took half an hour to do what should have taken 5 minutes. The chandlery owner, Mr. Pike, discussed rope weight, storms from the east, and the poor judgment of young sailors. Elias listened with the grave seriousness of a man conducting important commerce and not a man avoiding the embarrassment of looking down Finch Lane again. When he finally stepped outside, Nora was sitting on the low stone wall beside the boarding house with a paper parcel in her lap. He stopped in front of her. "You stayed," he said. "I did." "Mrs. Hallow treating you fairly?" Fairly enough. I scrubbed the stairs for 2 nights' credit, and she says she knows a woman who needs mending done. You sew? I repair. Sewing sounds prettier. He almost smiled. Almost. The silence that followed did not panic her. Elias noticed that. Everyone else in town poured words around him like sand into a crack. Nora let quiet exist. What did you do before Larkspur? He asked. Her thumb moved over the tied string of the parcel. Different things. There it was. A door closing without a slam. Elias recognized the craftsmanship. He had built doors like that himself. So he let it stand. The next time he returned, he brought nothing that could be mistaken for charity. No coins, no coat, no pity wrapped in paper. He brought a small bundle of dried lavender and cedar shavings from a chest in his office. Nora met him outside Maribel's, where they had somehow begun taking breakfast on Tuesdays without either of them making an arrangement out loud. She looked at the bundle. What is that? For the room, he said. You said the boarding house smells like old cabbage and damp rope. I said that once. I heard it once. She took the bundle carefully. Her expression shifted, not soft exactly, but less guarded, like a person standing near a stove and deciding whether the warmth was safe. Thank you, Elias. It was the first time she used his name. He carried the sound of it back to the boatyard like a fool. By the 4th Tuesday, Larkspur knew. Larkspur knew everything eventually. The town had a talent for making certainty from 3 sightings and a raised eyebrow. People saw Elias Rook eating breakfast with the woman from Finch Lane. People saw him walking slower when she spoke. People saw Nora Bell pay her half every time, and somehow found that detail more troubling than if she had not paid at all. Mrs. Agnes Vale stopped Elias outside the post office with the expression of a woman performing public service. She has no family here, Agnes said. Few people arrive with furniture and ancestry both. Agnes ignored that. A woman alone, sleeping near the chandlery, then sitting with you every week. It invites talk. Then talk to someone who invited it. Be careful, Elias. People run for reasons. He looked at her for so long she adjusted her gloves. Yes, he said. And people stay away from home for reasons too. He walked past her before she could decide which part offended her most. But the conversation stayed with him. Not because he believed Agnes. He had never had much patience for suspicion dressed as morality. It stayed because there was truth under the poison. Nora had come from somewhere. Nora had left something. Nora had chosen cold stone behind a chandlery over whatever waited behind her. And Elias, who had made a religion of not needing to know anyone, now wanted to know her story badly enough that the wanting itself frightened him. The turn came on a night when the harbor froze along the edges. Elias had stayed late at the customs office over a dispute about a damaged cargo of oak planks. By the time he stepped out, the street lamps were burning low, and the tide was pulling black water under the wharf. He took the back way past Finch Lane. That was when he heard a sound behind the boarding house. Not the laugh. Something smaller. He should have kept walking. Nora's grief was not his property. His instinct was to grant privacy, and for once that instinct might have been the right one. Then he heard it again. She was sitting on the back step near the water barrel, a folded letter in her hand. The cold had turned her face pale. She was crying without noise, the way a person cries when she has learned that being heard can cost too much. Elias stopped at the gate, saw him and straightened immediately. The tears did not vanish. She simply gathered herself around them. I didn't mean to intrude, he said. You didn't? That was not true. They both knew it. He could have nodded and gone. He nearly did. Instead, he opened the gate and sat on the far end of the step, leaving enough distance for dignity to sit between them. Nora did not tell him to leave. For a long time they listened to the harbor. The water knocked against the pilings. A loose shutter clicked somewhere above them. The foghorn gave one low note beyond the breakwater and faded into the dark. At last she said, "My brother found me." Elias did not move. "I thought he wouldn't, or maybe I only hoped." "Is he dangerous?" "No." She looked at the letter. "Not in the way men mean when they ask that." The answer was worse than yes in a way Elias understood. "He wants me to come back," she said. "Says things have changed." "Have they?" Nora gave a tired smile that had no joy in it. "That is the trouble with letters. They can lie without changing their handwriting." He looked out toward the black water. "Old claims travel well," he said. "Better than people do." Nora turned her head. In the dim light, her face had gone very still. "Yes," she whispered. "That is exactly it." The next Tuesday she told him the rest. Not all of it. Elias understood there were rooms inside a life no one entered on a first invitation, but she gave him the shape. Her father had owned a small cooperage and 2 acres of apple trees in a town south of the marshlands. After he died, her older brother Thomas inherited the business, the debts, and the unshakable belief that Nora was one more asset to be managed. Thomas borrowed badly, gambled worse, then found a solution with a widowed merchant named Baird, who had money, influence, and the habit of speaking about women as if they were parcels mislabeled at a freight office. "Baird wanted a wife who would not ask questions," Nora said. "Thomas wanted his notes forgiven. They both thought I should appreciate being useful." She said it evenly. That made Elias's anger come slower and harder. "What did you do?" "I packed what I could carry and left before dawn. I sold my mother's silver thimble for coach fare as far as Millbrook. After that, I worked where I could." "And slept where you had to?" She met his eyes. "Yes." The room seemed to narrow around them. Nora turned her cup once, twice between her hands. "Thomas says Baird has remarried. He says the worst is past. He says he wants to mend what he broke." "Do you believe him?" "I don't know." There was the cliff edge. Not the brother, not the debt, not even the past. The danger was that Nora might mistake someone else's remorse for an obligation to surrender the life she had begun building. Elias had no claim on her. He knew that. 4 breakfasts, a bundle of cedar, 1 night on a back step, and a knowledge of her name spoken in his office when no one was there did not give him rights. But it had given him something worse than rights. Care. He thought about it for 5 days. On Sunday afternoon he walked to the dry goods shop where Nora had taken mending work in the back room. He had no list, no errand, no useful lie. When she saw him standing between bolts of wool and jars of buttons, she set down the shirt she was repairing. "Elias?" Mrs. Mercer, who owned the shop and had the sharp mercy of a woman who saw more than she said, disappeared into the storeroom with magnificent speed. Elias held his hat in both hands. "I've been thinking about your brother." "I assumed you had. You get a line between your eyes when you disapprove of someone." "I don't think you should go back because he has decided forgiveness would ease him." Nora looked at him carefully. "If you go," he said, "go because you want answers, or because you choose mercy, or because you decide the past deserves one measured visit with your own return ticket in your own pocket. But do not go because Thomas has remembered that blood is useful when money fails. The quiet after that was different from all their other quiets. Nora folded her hands over the half-mended sleeve. "Is that the only reason you came?" Elias looked at her. He thought of the alley, the laugh, the 2 coins beside his hand, the way she had cried without asking to be comforted, the way she stood in every room as if poverty had no authority over her name. "No," he said, "it is not." "Then say the other reason." He was not built for eloquence. That was one of the first honest facts about him. Words left his mouth like men leaving a sinking boat, grimly, one at a time, and not always in the proper order. "I would like you to remain in Larkspur," he said. Nora waited. "I would like you to remain because you choose it. Not because the boarding house needs floors scrubbed, not because Mrs. Mercer has hems to mend, and not because I have an opinion about your brother." He swallowed. "I would like more Tuesdays." For a moment, Nora simply looked at him. Then something opened in her expression, slow and astonished, as if she had found a window in a wall she had stopped testing. "More Tuesdays," she repeated. "Yes." "That is what you came to offer?" "It appears so." Her mouth curved. "You are a very strange man, Elias Rook." "I have been told worse." "Not by me." And that, somehow, was answer enough to let him breathe again. Nora wrote to Thomas. Elias did not ask to read the letter. He would have cut off his own hand before treating her decision like a document requiring his approval. But 2 weeks later, over breakfast, she told him what she had said. She had written that she was alive, working, and settled. She had written that if Thomas wished to repair what he had done, he could begin by telling the truth in ink and proving patience over time. She would consider a visit in spring, on her own terms, with money for her own return passage already set aside. Elias nodded. "Good." "Only good?" "Very good." Nora smiled into her tea, and the room seemed warmer for it. Winter pressed down on Larkspur with both hands. The harbor took on a skin of ice. The ropes froze stiff on the pier. Men cursed through scarves. Windows turned white at the edges every morning. Elias sent firewood to Mrs. Hallow's boarding house without signing the cart slip. Mrs. Hallow signed for it with a look that said anonymity was adorable in men old enough to know better. Nora knew anyway. She said nothing about it until the next Tuesday, when she placed a pair of mended work gloves beside his coffee. "For the wood," she said. "I didn't ask repayment." "I know." There it was again, the boundary, the balance, the promise that whatever grew between them would not grow out of debt. He wore the gloves for the rest of the winter. Their Tuesdays lengthened. Breakfast became a walk to the end of the pier when the wind allowed it. The walk became a stop at the boatyard when she asked questions about steam winches and plank curvature that surprised his foreman into respectful silence. Nora's mind moved differently than his. Elias thought in straight beams and load-bearing walls. Nora thought in hinges, currents, and hidden catches. She saw the small thing that changed the whole room. He began to look forward to being corrected. That frightened him less than it should have. In December, she told him about her mother, who had taught her to keep account books and never trust a man who spoke too often about protection. In January, he told her about the business partner who had once carried the Rook name, ledger access, and nearly half the yard's savings out of town before dawn. He had never told the story cleanly to anyone. He expected pity. Nora gave him anger instead, precise and loyal. That was theft, she said. People called it a failed partnership. People call many things by soft names when the thief is polite. Elias looked at her then and felt something in him settle. By February, Nora had bought herself a proper wool coat from Mrs. Mercer, dark blue, second-hand, altered at the cuffs with her own needle. She wore it like a flag. One Sunday, Elias invited her to supper in the rooms above the boatyard office. It was not a grand house. He owned one, farther up the hill, but he had lived near the yard for years because work asked less of him than empty rooms did. Nora noticed the unused parlor, the careful desk, the single chair by the stove. "You live as if expecting no one," she said. "I was." "And now?" He looked at her coat hanging by the door. "Now I am reconsidering the furniture." She laughed then, softer than the first time. This is dangerous to him. Beaster in March, on the pier after a storm had scrubbed the sky clean. There was no ring at first. He had one in his pocket, but he had already accepted that anything he planned too carefully around Nora had a way of collapsing into honesty. They stood near the winch house, watching sunlight break over wet boards. The harbor smelled of salt, coal smoke, and thawing rope. "I have been thinking," Elias said. Nora closed her eyes briefly. "God help us. I would like this to be permanent." She turned to him. "The breakfasts, the walks, the way my office is less tolerable when you have not insulted my bookkeeping, the coat on the hook, your questions about the yard, the fact that I now own 2 chairs by the stove." Nora's face changed, but he pushed on before courage deserted him. "I am asking you to marry me. Badly, I suspect, but sincerely." She stared at him. Then she laughed. The same laugh, the first laugh. It came up through the cold March air and rang against the water, and did to Elias exactly what it had done beside the Chandlery alley. It made a gate of him. It opened something he had mistaken for stone. "You are the only man I know," she said, wiping one eye, "who can make a proposal sound like a shipping inventory." "Is that a no?" "That is obviously a yes." He exhaled so sharply she laughed again. Then he took the ring from his pocket. It had belonged to his grandmother, plain gold, no stone large enough to make a spectacle of itself. Nora looked at it for a long moment. "I will not disappear into your name," she said. "No. I will keep working if I choose. Yes. I will visit Thomas only when I decide. Yes. And if you ever try to make a decision out of my life without me in the room, I will deserve the consequences." She held out her hand. He placed the ring there, careful as a man lowering a lantern into darkness. They married in May, when the harbor thawed fully and the first lilacs opened near the church fence. Mrs. Hallow cried into a handkerchief she later denied using. Mrs. Mercer adjusted Nora's sleeve 3 times and declared the stitching superior to anything sold in Boston. Mr. Pike gave them a coil of rope as a wedding gift because Chandlery men understand romance in their own language. Agnes Vale attended and told 3 people she had sensed the match from the beginning, which was a kind of fiction the town allowed because weddings make generous liars of everyone. Nora kept her work at the dry goods shop 2 days a week because she liked it. Elias never suggested otherwise. At the boatyard, men learned that Mrs. Rook could read an invoice faster than most clerks and identify padded numbers before the ink dried. Within a month, half the suppliers feared her more than they feared Elias. The house up the hill changed slowly, not into a showplace, not into proof of rescue. Into a place where 2 people could breathe. A second chair by the stove, a blue coat by the door, lavender and cedar in the linen chest, a small shelf for Nora's mother's account book, 2 cups left near the sink in the morning, because someone had been in no hurry to clear them. Thomas came in July. He looked older than Nora expected, smaller too, though perhaps that was because fear had made him large in memory. He arrived with a hat in his hands and a letter already worn at the fold. Elias stayed near enough to be useful and far enough to be respectful. Most of the conversation happened on the beach below the hill. Nora and Thomas walked where the tide had pulled back and left the sand firm. Elias watched from the porch until Nora glanced up once and shook her head. Not because she wanted him gone, because she had it. So he went inside. Thomas stayed 2 nights. There were apologies that did not fix everything, and truths that did not soften enough. But there was also one morning when Nora came down to breakfast carrying less weight in her shoulders than she had carried the day before. When Thomas left, she stood by the road until his hired cart disappeared around the bend. Elias came to stand beside her. He did not ask if she was all right. She reached for his hand without looking. That was the answer. 2 years later, on a Tuesday morning, Nora Rook sat in the kitchen above the harbor with tea gone cold in front of her and one hand resting on the table as if the wood could steady the future. Elias was reviewing invoices and pretending not to notice she had been smiling at nothing for nearly 10 minutes. At last she said, "We will need another chair." He looked up. She looked back. The meaning crossed the room more slowly than speech and struck him harder. Elias rose, came around the table, and knelt beside her chair, because for once his knees understood before his words did. He took her hand in both of his. Nora laughed. That laugh again. The one from the alley. The one from the pier. The one that had never belonged to poverty, fear, men, brothers, gossip, or any locked room life had tried to put her in. Elias pressed his forehead to her hand and thought that no one had told him love would feel this way. Not like being saved. Not like saving someone else. Like being trusted with a door you would never force open. So that is where we leave Elias and Nora Rook. Not at an ending, but at another beginning. In a harbor town that once watched a woman with a thin coat laugh at the richest man on the pier and failed to understand what it was seeing. She had not been laughing because she owned nothing. She had been laughing because even then, cold and hungry and cornered by the past, she still belonged to herself. And in the end, that was the one thing Elias Rook was wise enough never to ask her to give up. If slow burn stories about quiet people, hard choices, and ordinary lives turning extraordinary are what you come back for, there are more waiting for you here. And before you go, tell us where this story found you. A harbor town, a farm road, a crowded city, a warm country, a cold one. Drop your location in the comments, and if there is a kind of story you want next, leave that too. Good stories travel farther when the right people carry them.